Hi and welcome. Today I want to show you how to program classic electronic drums on a Blofeld and use them in the multimode. In the example before, you also heard the acid bass sound, which I programmed in a different video before. You can watch it. I think there should be a link in the upper corner right there. And let's focus only on the drum sounds. So I'm going to show you how to program a kick sound, how to program a hi-hat sound, a snare, toms, and laser beam. So let's start with the kick sound. The kick sound can be programmed like this. Let's start with a complete new sound. And let's assign a sine wave to oscillator 1 with a very low frequency. And a triangle wave to oscillator 2, also with a low frequency of 64 feet. And there you can hear the first problem, because these are normal oscillators and the pitch changes depending on which key you're pressing. But we don't want to play notes, we just want to hear a static sound. So we have to go back to oscillator 1 and turn off the pitch bend influence and the key track. And the same with oscillator 2. And now you can hear the same pitch independent on which note you're playing. The next station is the filter. We can use the low pass 12 dB type to get a softer sound and turn the cutoff down to 105, for instance. And then we can use the drive, for instance with a drive curve hard, to shape our sound a little bit. I think 11 will do the job. Remember, this is going to be just a short kick sound. Let's have a look on the envelopes. The filter envelope is going to be with an attack of 10 and decay of, let's say, 30. And the amp envelope is going to have a slight release of 45. As you may realize, we didn't apply the filter envelope on the filter. So what we are going to do is we switch to the modulation matrix and we are using the filter envelope as a control for the noise level. Noise level with an amount of, with an amount of 41, for instance. So with this little noise in the beginning, you can get the effect of this suddenly moving and noisy air of the kick drum. What you can do as well is you can go to filter 2, put that in serial with filter 1 and use the high pass 12 dB type to reduce these extreme low frequencies. Let's say, for instance, with a cutoff of 20. You can also increase the resonance to make the cut a bit sharper. And also to emphasize this particular low frequency. The next thing you can do is you can go back to the modulation matrix, or let's say first we can go to the LFO 1 and use the sample and hold and speed 0 and apply this as a second modulation to our filter 1 drive with the amount of 33. And this means that every time then this kick plays, you get a slightly different sound. I can exaggerate. I'm turning this down to 33 because I just want a small variation. By applying this variation to every part, to every instrument, we can create a nice and vivid patch. And of course, in order to have a constant loudness, you should decrease the velocity, and you should also consider bypassing both effects if you don't need them, especially if you want to use the sound later in the multimode, where you definitely need as many voices as possible. By turning off the effects completely, you can get more processing power and more voices. And that's the kick. The next instrument I want to show you is the hi-hat. Let's start again with a fresh patch. And we actually don't need the classic oscillators at all. We are just going to use the noise, and therefore I'm increasing the color to 32. We can go immediately to our filter envelope, which is going to control the loudness of the noise. Let's say we add a small attack time of 11, decay of 32, and release of 39, for instance. And of course we have to apply the filter envelope to the noise level. This sounds already like a primitive hi-hat. Now we should refine everything. So let's go to filter, for instance, use a bandpass 12 dB type, turn it down to 118 in cutoff, and increase the resonance to get a sharp frequency. This sounds very metallic, almost like a very high bell. If it's too low, it's just noise. So you have to find a resonance configuration somewhere in between. And again, we can use the drive to change the characteristics of this sound. In this case, I'm using the sine shaper. I think this sounds already, or it let's say it resembles pretty much a hi-hat. It will never be like a perfect real hi-hat, but it's nice enough, okay? And we can put filter 2 in serial to filter 1 and use a low pass type, like low pass 12 dB, with just a little bit of cutoff, so that the extremely high frequencies are not too dominant. And we can use LFO2 to modulate the panning of filter 2. So that we get a more exciting sound. As you've seen, LFO1 can be put into sample and hold mode with speed of 0, just like LFO2, to bring in more variation for each plate's, let's say, occurrence or note of this instrument. In this case, I'm using LFO2, as I said, to modulate the panning of filter 2. Always modulate the panning of the outgoing filter, remember that. And I'm using LFO1 to modulate the filter envelope decay, which is the decay of the overall sound. So let's go to the modulation matrix. We have the first entry to modulate the noise level to hear something, and the second entry, LFO1, to modulate filter envelope decay. Just a little bit, just with 38, for instance. As you can see, the result is always somewhere in between a closed and a open hi-hat. Finally, we should also decrease the velocity, and you can apply in effect slot 1 a flanger with a medium mixing, slower speed of 10, higher depth, let's say 80, and lower feedback of 110. You can play with the polarity. And this gives you early Ultravox vibes, like early machine drums and new romantic songs, which often played heavily with phasers and flangers and so on. So I would keep that like it is now. You can of course turn it off or use a different effect. Especially the triple FX is a nice effect if you want to add a bit crusher to one of the instruments. The third instrument is a snare sound. So let's try that. Again, initial sound. Again, we are not going to use one of the oscillators, but only the noise. This time I change the color of the noise to -10 to get a more, you could say, muddy sound. The color gives us control over the emphasis on frequencies. So a lower color gives us more lower and less higher frequencies, and a positive number vice versa. Again, you can hear nothing We are again using the filter envelope, in this time with an attack of 31, decay of 51, and release of 65. And we are using again the filter envelope in combination with the amp envelope to control the loudness of the noise. Well, this sound is too soft, so you can use, for instance, LFO1 with a square wave and maximum speed as a modulation source for the filter. So we can go to the FM section, choose LFO1 and apply some frequency modulation to it. And here you can use the sine shaper as well to change the sound a bit. We are decreasing the velocity again. We can go to effect slot 1 and use this time the triple effects effect with a mix of 40. And let's say overdrive of just 45. Sample and hold to 33. Some chorus. And this gives us a very artificial, very digital and almost Simmons-like snare sound. And that's the snare. The fourth instrument I want to show you is the toms section. So let's start again with a new sound. This time we need the oscillators because we need a highly organic and not just a noise, but has dominant frequencies in it. So I'm using a sine wave with a 16-foot octave. I'm reducing this a little bit for later increase by distortion. Let's say around 50 something. And I set pitchable, but not by the keyboard keys, but by modulation. And the second oscillator should be a sine wave as well. Sine wave, this time with 32-foot setting, a bit lower, like 118. And again, not pitch controlled by the keyboard keys or the pitch wheel. On top of that, we're going to use the noise, but not as a dominant sound, just a little bit. I'm turning the color completely down to -50. And now let's go to the filters. Filter 1 can be a high pass 12 dB type. There it is, with a cutoff of 41. And we are adding drive, this time the tube model with a heavy drive of 40. Again, the filter envelope will be used to add a little bit of noise. Let's say decay 34 something, and as well release around 34, 35. The amp envelope should have some decay as well, and some release, like 30 something. Again, we can use the LFO and the sample and hold mode with 0 speed for a variation for every single played note. And let's apply LFO1 to the overall pitch. That's the modulation I meant. An extreme setting would make it more clear. But I don't want that much of variation. I just want to change the pitch slightly for each note to get a more vivid sound. And in the second modulation slot, we are using the filter envelope again for the noise level. But as you can hear, just a little bit, just to form the attack sound of each note. It's interesting how these little parts can contribute to a sound. And if you're not using the effects, just as a reminder, you should turn them off completely. And the last instrument which I want to show you is the classic Kraftwerkisch laser beam. So let's start again with a new patch. I'm using the pulse in oscillator 1. Again, we don't want different pitches for different keyboard keys, just a constant pitch. And I'm using the pulse in oscillator 2 as well. Again, turning off the pitch influence. Now filter 1 is the actual forming sound. So we are using the classic low pass 2040 B type, decreasing the cutoff to 47, increasing the resonance all the way up to 127, and applying the filter envelope. We can use the tube model to change the sound. And as you can hear, even if the drive is 0, just changing the drive curve, the distortion model, gives us a change in the sound, which is quite fascinating. Filter 2 will be in serial with filter 1. And in filter 2 we have a high pass 12 dB type with, high pass 12 dB type with a very low cutoff of 13. Because we don't need low frequencies in this instrument. And here again we can apply some drive setting, let's say a hard drive. with 50, and we can modulate the panning with LFO1 with maximum amount. And LFO1 can be a bit faster, like 90 for instance. And that's a beautiful, almost digital, with digital artifacts like sound. So finally we can change the filter envelope by reducing the decay time with just a little bit of release. 28 in this case. I'm reducing the sustain completely. In the amp envelope with just 32 of decay. But you can play around with the settings, of course. Finally, velocity to 0 and bypass to effect 1 and effect 2. And these are all instruments. When it comes to the use of the instruments in combination in a complete rhythm, we can first have a look on each instrument, each part separately. So let's start with the kick sound. Here we can simply program the arpeggiator directly. So we have to turn on the arpeggiator, clock in this case 1/8. Tempo will be defined later by the Multimode program. You can use the user pattern, change the length of the note. And in my case, I'm turning out the timing factor because now comes the reason why. You can see that I constantly entered notes to the arpeggiator, but here in the end, one note is shifted in the timing, and the timing factor defines how much it is shifted, or in other words, how much or what actually this -3 means, because -3 is only relative to all other notes. You can define -3 plus 3, but the actual shifting is defined by the timing factor. That's my arpeggiator for the kick. Now let's have a look on the hi-hat. In my case, the arpeggiator for the hi-hat has a clock of 1/16, has no user pattern, note length of 1/16 as well. That's important because, as you remember, we programmed an open and closing hi-hat, kind of. This means that the note must be long enough to hear the open hi-hat completely. And that's the hi-hat. Now let's have a look on the snare sound. In this case, I'm using a 1/8 clock, and the clock can be, by the way, different for every part. That's the important information. We are using a clock of 1/8, a user pattern, length of 1/16, again timing factor maximum, because I changed the timing of the last note. You should definitely play around with timing, with emphasis, as well as with many more variations and modulations to make your drum sound interesting and vivid. The next sound is the tom. With this arpeggiator, I'm using a clock of 1/16, a user pattern, a length of 1/16. We don't need the timing factor in this case, and it's a very simple pattern. And finally, the laser beam sound. This sound is not complicated at all. In this arpeggiator, I have a very slow clock of 1/2, no user pattern, and a length of 1/16. So it does not really contribute that much to the overall rhythm. It's more like a slightly added decoration to the final result. So now we created our sounds, our instruments, we programmed the arpeggiators separately for each instrument, and now we have to combine them in one multimode program. In order to do so, we should change the mode of this machine from single sound to multi. Click Shift and Sound Multi to switch the mode. Now you can see part and play multi. So we can go to some empty multimode slot and do our settings. You have to remember at which position you had your initial sounds. So in my case, if I want to configure all the parts, I have to select B30, which is the kick, press play and switch the knob to switch to part 2. Then we have B31, which is the hi-hat. Part 3 is B32, the snare. Part 4 is B33 and B35. At this point you may not hear all the drums at all, or just the kick. Can be a bit confusing. The reason for this is you have to make sure that the volume is up for every part you want to hear. That's one thing, and you have to make sure that the channels are correct for every part. As I said, the multimode is defining the tempo or the BPMs of all the parts of all the patches. Using the multimode in the Blofeld can be a bit troublesome. You have to remember and concentrate that if you want to switch from the multi-level to the patch level, you have to click on the play button, then you can scroll. If you want to switch back to the multimode, you press play again. But now when you turn the knob, you're just changing to a different multimode and losing your changes. right? And also changing the multimode program and the patches at once in the multimode status or the multimode configuration program of the Blofeld can be confusing. So I encourage you to do the settings in the sound mode to program each sound and then just combining them later in the multimode like I showed just right now. One thing you have to remember when you're working with the multimode is that part 1 is always defining effect slot 2 for each of the parts. So if you want to add delay or reverb, you're doing this in the sound of part number 1, and then you can just change the mixing parameter of all the other parts. And if you want to use effect slot number 1 in one of the patches, this patch has to be in the parts 1, 2, 3 or 4. All the other parts do not have any effect slot 1 at all. So you have to be very smart and to plan your multimode and the configuration. I hope you enjoyed watching this very long tutorial this time. If so, leave a like, make a comment and subscribe to my channel for more videos, especially about the Blofeld synthesizer, and consider joining my channel as a member, because with a membership you get access to even more videos. You get access to my Blofeld modifier simulator software, as well as to even more patches which I programmed, which you can use with your very own Blofeld. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.